Instacart has this large business, right? But people don't consume, kind of grocery goods just from grocery stores. If I'm Coca-Cola and I want to advertise to people shopping for grocery products or, shopping for tonight's dinner from a restaurant, there's a really huge opportunity for Coca-Cola kind of to get in front of those eyeballs, right? As people are making purchases in the same way that Amazon's ad business works.
Hi, everyone. It's Wednesday, August 18th. Thanks for listening to the penultimate episode of the Behind the Numbers ad platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm your host, Principal Analyst Nicole Perrin, and I am incredibly excited today for my platform to talk about advertising with some of the smartest people I know, because I really do have two of my favorite people on to do this with me today, both from Insider Intelligence. I've got Principal Analyst covering retail and e-commerce, Andrew Lipsman. Welcome back on the show, Andrew.
Hey, Nicole. Great to be back.
And I've also got Eric Hagstrom, who's one of our senior forecasting analysts. Hey, Eric, thank you again so much for coming on my show.
Hey, great to be here.
So I mentioned this is the second to last ad platform that we'll ever get to do. And I've got two of my buddies on who are both, like me, pretty into retail media. And I thought it would be fun to do our second to last show on something that we have been studying together for years, that we've kind of gotten into a little bit together. We've been really interested in it. We've developed a lot of additional coverage, including some new forecasts on the subject. And I just kind of wanted to get us together and give us a chance to really talk about what we think is interesting about retail media. So guys, thank you again for joining me for this. Now, let's start off by talking about how we got interested in this topic to begin with. I think we kind of all took a little bit of a different path from each other to studying this subject. I came to retail media because I'd been previously studying Amazon's ad business, which I was doing just because for a long time, I have researched all of the largest digital ad sellers in the US. So I had been spending a lot of time researching the duopoly, Facebook and Google, and just doing lots of work writing about US digital ad spending and overall market dynamics in that space. And so as Amazon rose up and got bigger, I started researching Amazon on a regular basis. I've been writing reports on Amazon's ad business for several years. Eventually in 2018, they became the number 3 digital ad seller in the US. And by that time, there was a lot more attention on this idea of retail media. And I had started to also look beyond just Amazon to kind of understand more about the phenomenon. But I'd love to hear how you two kind of originally got interested in it. Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, so I, during my entire career, really spent a lot of time looking at advertising research and e-commerce. So where those two things intersect, it's always been really interesting to me. When I came to eMarketer in 2018, Nicole, actually, I have to give you credit. I think the Amazon advertising report from 2018 might have been one of the first things that I picked up.
Awesome.
So I was already interested in the topic, but reading your analysis helped crystallize a lot of things for me. And another part of how I was approaching it and why I was interested is that I have kind of a broad macro thesis that digital advertising budgets follow measurement.
Yep.
And one of the things that I recognized early on was, that's what made dollars flow to Google in the early days. It's what made dollars flow to Facebook after that. And Amazon had a similar emerging value proposition around measurement and also the ability to target based on the data that they were collecting. And I realized that they had this closed loop ecosystem. And frankly, that in many respects, their data was best in class because they were looking at purchasing behavior. So I just put all those pieces together. And then you look at the ad growth numbers for Amazon and you realize that this was a big thing. And then immediately once I had convinced myself that this was a big thing, I started looking at what other players were going to be able to provide interesting offerings as well.
Yeah. And, to your point about dollars following measurement in digital, I mean, I think for people like me who have watched the growth of the digital ad space sort of since the advent of programmatic, seeing, we've talked for so many years about how concentrated in the lower funnel digital spending is, how it's kind of like all of the direct marketing budgets switched over to this super measurable channel. We've been waiting for the brand dollars that whole time. And you would see these lower funnel budgets go to places that could use data for targeting and for measurement, but that we knew didn't have the same level of commercial value as what, for example, Amazon could provide on both of those sides, right? So I think we definitely saw that offering as incredibly compelling within the context of how we'd seen digital advertising get bigger over the past 10, 15 years. Eric, what about you? How did you get interested in retail media?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not too dissimilar from Nicole's case. I've worked on our digital advertising forecast for a while, specifically Google, Amazon, and a lot of the video stuff. And maybe about a year ago, we noticed that, hey, look, Amazon, their ad business did phenomenal through the pandemic. It accelerated quite a bit. It still showed, this incredible growth that we'd seen in previous years, just at much larger scale and through a massive recession. There's a number of reasons for this that I won't get into, but we decided, hey, look, let's look into some of the other players and try and quantify them. And we saw a very clear trend where this was not just an Amazon story. They by far had the largest ad business from any retailer, but Walmart had a very large ad business that grew. Walmart's ad business has been around for quite a while, but I wouldn't say that it showed this really strong growth until 2019 and 2020, when they both started investing it to try and, I don't want to say mimic, but chase what, Amazon was doing. And they benefited from a lot of the same pandemic tailwinds. But also you had this rise of Instacart, who now has a couple $100 million ad business. You have Kroger, who has a large ad business. You have Criteo, who's built this large retail media ad business very, very quickly. And I'm trying to think of some other ones as well. eBay, they haven't been growing their retail sales that strongly, at least in comparison to some of these other players like an Amazon or a Walmart. But again, their ad business grew pretty substantially. And I mean, you can kind of view a lot of this as, almost a pseudo take rate in a lot of ways, where you're just letting your suppliers and third-party sellers pay to appear higher in your results. And it's just another take rate on the sale in the same way that, there are other take rates in these ecosystems. But at the same time, you're seeing this kind of explosion in offsite where you can buy advertising through Amazon's DSP and have it reach their various media properties. Walmart has this new deal with the Trade Desk where they'll have a white labeled Walmart DSP by Q4 of this year. So it's really kind of exploding in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So you've both mentioned a bunch of companies beyond just Amazon, which, obviously we are talking about kind of at the center of this phenomenon, because in the US, they do account for about 3/4 of net retail media ad revenues. What do you both think is the most interesting company to watch in the space right now? Eric, I'll let you take this one first.
Yeah, I think the most interesting by far is Walmart. And
I am shocked that you were going to say that. That's my answer, just so you know. Yeah. And I didn't think it was going to be Eric's answer. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm surprised he didn't think it was going to be my answer, but
DoorDash. I thought you were going to say DoorDash.
I also thought he was going to say DoorDash.
I was going to say DoorDash and Uber is number 2. I'm dead serious. So we speak a little bit too much, but at the same time, let's back up on Walmart. In some ways, they're doing exactly what Amazon's doing with the on-site stuff, but this off-site deal with the Trade Desk to run their DSP through a white label where you're using Walmart shopper data to target your ads and measure them. I think that's something that's incredibly valuable. And when you look at who Walmart's customers are on the ad side, it's the largest CPG brands in the country. And when you look at who spends a lot of money on TV and CTV ads, it's these large CPG brands. And we're going to see a shift of, spend over from kind of linear TV to CTV to retail media to all these other digital offerings. And I have the feeling that Walmart, through this DSP, is going to take a lot of that spend. And to clarify on DoorDash and Uber, we have seen ultimately, Instacart has grown a very large ad business based off their grocery delivery offerings, and DoorDash and Uber are moving into the space. But there is a pretty big issue with Instacart's ad products, from what I've heard anecdotally, is that people don't go on the app that often. They maybe make a purchase once a month. It can be a very large, high basket size, so it's good for them. But at the same time, you don't have the same behavior where people are going onto the app, scrolling, shopping, and it's maybe the frequency isn't there relative to an Amazon or a Walmart or something like that. Where DoorDash and Uber get really interesting is that they are moving into grocery, just like Instacart has this large business, right? But people don't consume, kind of grocery goods just from grocery stores. If I'm Coca-Cola and I want to advertise to people shopping for grocery products or, shopping for tonight's dinner from a restaurant, there's a really huge opportunity for Coca-Cola kind of to get in front of those eyeballs, right, as people are making purchases in the same way that Amazon's ad business works. So I think that there's a massive opportunity there. Obviously, it's really early days and I'm being very, very speculative there. But I think that there's a huge opportunity. And when you talk about DoorDash and Uber, with the restaurant delivery business, people who use those services often use them once a week. So there's a huge amount of frequency there and people are on those services a lot.
See, you say we speak to each other too much, but I mean, you can still surprise us. So there you go.
I mean, to be fair, you guessed what I was going to say, just in a slightly different order.
Andrew, what about you? What's your answer?
Well, I just want to echo the Walmart answer. That wasn't going to be my answer, but I do think it's interesting. And I'll just add to it by saying, I think the big footprint in both online and offline purchase gives it a really compelling offering from a closed loop standpoint that bests Amazon because of the huge offline footprint of data, and it works across categories. So in one sense, Walmart is maybe it's best in class probably in that offline footprint. It may not be best in anything else, but it's really good on all the other core dimensions. So I think it has a combined value proposition that's strong. I was going to say Instacart. As Eric noted, there are some question marks around Instacart at this moment in time, maybe some slowing growth on revenue as we move past, the peak of the pandemic. What does that mean for usage frequency? All that stuff matters. I would say what I'm looking at mostly with Instacart right now is a very clear direction that their business is going to emphasize advertising over the other aspects of it. Right. And the strongest signal that we have for that is their recent executive hires, right? Their CEO stepped their CEO stepped aside. He's now executive chairman, and they brought in Fiji Simo and as CEO, and she headed up the Facebook app in addition to other aspects of their advertising business. So, if you want to know somebody who can bring in some product chops and maybe help solve the frequency part of the equation, she seems like a good candidate for that. And then Nicole, as you mentioned, Carolyn Everson, who headed up Facebook's advertising business and really is an expert at courting big brands. I think that's an evolution that's going to happen here, is how you bring in those really big brand advertising budgets. So I have to think with those key players in place that advertising is going to become the story for Instacart. And I think they'll progress there.
And I mean, I think that Instacart's ad product is, by far the best part of the business. It's growing like a weed right now, even though that it seems that sales have slowed, or sales growth has slowed a little bit. But at the same time, all these retail media businesses are based on how many sales are happening on the platform. And once that starts to slow, the ad business, you start to get a lot of questions, if that makes sense. Because right now, the ad business is probably around 2% or so of overall sales for Instacart. Amazon's around 5%. I've seen projections from someone like a Goldman Sachs who's saying that for CPG advertisers, they might be willing to spend up to 10% of their total sales on this kind of retail media advertising over time. But, it does put a cap on, how much people are able to spend, not just willing, but able.
Instacart has, I think one of the other strengths is they have diversity because they're working with so many grocery retailers. There's more talk about, large ones churning out. That's certainly a risk, but I don't think there's any getting around the fact that they're just going to have hundreds and hundreds of retailers on their platform. So that really gives them some breadth and some depth. Maybe they need a little bit more depth of data, but there's a compelling offering there for brands to tap into. And as we've noted in the past, they're really following the Amazon playbook. So they've spun up this ad business pretty quickly here. And there's, I think a strong direction to it. The other one that I'll just bring up, I don't have a lot to say on it at the moment, but it's getting further out into the future. I think a sleeping giant in retail media is Shopify.
Yeah.
There's just some early rumblings here within the last month or two about them building out some audience offerings. And, I think they can become a key player because they are seeing so much interesting data around purchases, particularly with D2C brands. I think that data becomes more important for brands who want to build their brand.
Yep.
And so, whereas most retail media to date has been through search, I see Shopify being able to plug in to more upper funnel. They're already partnering with Facebook and Google, but eventually I see them as probably some interesting fuel for CTV advertising efforts.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for sure. And one that I am also interested in watching on that little farther out time scale. My answer to this question was going to be Walmart, like I said. A few reasons why I think Walmart is really interesting, which you guys already mentioned. I mean, they have been investing in this business, growing it very rapidly since bringing it back in-house. They've got some really interesting offerings already, and I think we'll continue to see more. Andrew, you mentioned this huge footprint, both physical footprint and online footprint. And of course, they go across categories. So I think it's interesting because it's potentially interesting to a lot more types of advertisers. And my own personal prejudice, I can't get excited about grocery. I can't get excited about the grocery category. I know it's really important for retail media. I mean, I've been the first one to be talking for years and years about how important this is for CPG brands, but I just do not like groceries myself. So they're not making it to the top of my interesting list.
Let's be honest with Walmart. How much of their sales are grocery products?
A lot.
Most, right?
I know.
Nation's largest grocer.
But there's also so much across categories. And one of the big opportunities that we're, I think, going to start seeing a lot more of with Amazon, but Walmart also will be a big player, is non-endemic advertising, right? When you can see cross-category purchase behavior, you build a profile of what life stage people are in. And then that brings you into the ability to target in categories like auto. Oh, somebody just had a third kid, time to target them with minivan, right? Or help, life insurance, things of that nature. You start to get into these really big bucket brand advertiser categories. So that's a big upside, I think, for both of those two platforms.
Totally agree there. And I've definitely also been saying that those non-endemic brands, many of them are already active in the space, but those that aren't, I think are going to be taking a much harder look at retail media going forward as other sources of both targeting and measurement data become harder to come by. We'll be back in a second after a quick word about our sponsor to talk more about the consumer experience of retail media, where budgets are coming from, and also about the prospects for moving up the funnel. But first, a quick message about VTEX. Retail's next competitive threat may come from a business model or channel that didn't even exist a few months ago. This modern dynamic requires companies to adapt quickly, pivoting business seemingly overnight, something traditional commerce platforms just can't support. There's a new enterprise commerce platform on the rise, one that's fast, flexible, and doesn't require 9 months and $1 million to get up and running. Go to VTEX, VTEX.com/eMarketer to learn more. Okay, guys, back to talk more about retail media. I'd love to hear what you think about the consumer experience at this point, to the extent that you have checked out the various apps or properties that do this. But I'm also specifically wondering what you think about the customer experience of Amazon these days. Andrew, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, well, I think the customer experience has not been the best. I think that we've seen the ad loads increase quite a bit. And I would say, particularly if I go back a couple of years, the relevance was, I think, kind of sorely lacking in a lot of cases, depending on the search.
Yep.
Sometimes much worse than others. Sometimes you'd get targeted for things that had nothing to do with the search. Other times, what I found maybe more misleading was when I would search for something where I wanted a specific feature. So my search was trying to filter for a feature, and then you'd get these results and I'd click on them and you'd assume that what you're looking at has that feature, and you get far down that process and realize, oh wait, this doesn't have what I want.
Yep.
I think, and again, this is anecdotal, but it's echoed by their CFO on some recent earnings calls. I think the relevance is improving on Amazon. So it's directionally moving in the right direction. So I think that if they can iron out those wrinkles, things will be fine, and that, it won't start to create such a bad experience that people really get deterred.
Yeah. What do you think, Eric?
I think the most important thing is that, one, these ads are incredibly native. So unless you work in the industry, unless you are, looking at every word on every page, you probably won't notice that a lot of the search results are in fact advertisements. Maybe the sponsored brands ads where they have the, kind of banner across the top that's, targeted based on your keyword. That's pretty obviously an ad, but like some of the sponsored products ads aren't as clear. So I don't think a lot of people really notice. And I know that some of the survey data does back that up. My biggest concern in the space moving forward is that this is a really great source of profit for the retailers, but at a certain point, it has to come out either the profit of your suppliers and third-party sellers, or people are going to have to raise prices. And this could just be another kind of inflation that's being put on the consumer, if that makes sense. Again, not the worst thing in the world, but if you do start raising prices on some of these platforms that are more ad heavy, that will be bad for the consumer in the long run.
Yeah, I personally think that the user experience on Amazon has gotten noticeably poorer for me because of the ads. And I do agree that most people don't notice that they're ads, and all of the consumer research that I've seen suggests that a lot of people don't realize that there are ads in these search results, and to the extent that they do, they typically find them more useful than annoying. And I think that's a pretty reasonable outlook, but I have had too many experiences at this point where I've searched for something very specific and have a hard time finding that specific item in my results because of ads for completely different items. And it's funny because I'm not really somebody who complains about conquesting. Like, there's a lot of people who, question sort of whether allowing conquesting is ethical or, forces advertisers to pay for search terms just to defend against that and stuff. But I do think there's a point at which the user query is specific enough that they really know what they want and they want to be served the result for what they know they want. And I know I'm in that position sometimes. And I feel like there's some cases on Amazon where it seems a little absurd. Like, I search a partial title and author of a book and get some other, obviously completely other book result in the ads. And it's like, well, those, you can't really substitute one book for another book. But of course, some people and some genres would say that you could substitute one book for another book. So, I mean, different users will have different experiences of that phenomenon too. But for me, it doesn't work that well. And it is a little bit of a turnoff for me. Now, I haven't read the newish Brad Stone book, Amazon Unbound, but I did find out when Ben Thompson interviewed him a bit ago in Stratechery that there is actually part of that book that gets into talking about this part of the ad business and the ad loads and how users were responding. It was the first time I think I'd seen anywhere in all of these years covering Amazon that internally Jeff Bezos did look at data and did have conversations about internal information they had that showed, yes, the user experience has been somewhat degraded. People are somewhat turned off. There is some drag on users buying things because of the ad experience, but not enough for them to back off of what they were doing at a level that I guess he was comfortable with. But I did think that was super interesting because I've been looking at this stuff for years and I've never heard that before.
I think I heard another interview with Brad Stone and he mentioned the same topic. And I thought that was interesting just because Amazon has always been, so customer centric, and this seems like an inviolable principle for the company. And in this case,
people
it was
said
like
that as I was covering the ads business, and I was like, well, they say that, but here we are. And does it really seem like that at this point?
Yeah. Right. So he had this internal acknowledgement or his reporting said that basically it was like, well, maybe it's degrading it a little bit, but let's be honest, the profits are too good to say no to.
Exactly. Yeah.
And let's be honest too, like from the forecasting standpoint, I'm on the team that makes the numbers and tries and predicts the future. And the question around Amazon's ad business is, when are they going to pull back? When are they going to say, okay, well, this is enough advertising for now. We don't want to degrade the user experience. Let's just kind of keep it where it is and, pull our foot off the pedal a little bit. And we've been saying that for years, and it's never happened. They've continued to push even harder and harder into this business in a lot of ways. And I mean, it's one of those things where
well, that's why I've been skeptical about it for years.
Yeah, everyone's been skeptical of it, and rightly so. And now you have basically everyone else is moving to a very similar model for the most part.
Yeah.
And so maybe this leads us to the next part of the discussion, because what has to happen? You can't keep cramming more and more ads down people's throats. It has to jump into new inventory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about those product searches, which, listen, that's probably the best version of advertising, but there's a lot more that Amazon and everyone else can do once they start thinking a little bit more up funnel.
Yeah. And we are going to talk up funnel in a second. But first, I want to get your read on where the budgets from retail media will be coming from over the next few years. I think we've already started to see some evolution here, right? Because when I first started looking at this, I think we thought it was mostly coming from shopper marketing budgets or trade budgets, with some coming from digital budgets. Now, maybe tilting more even / more of the brands merging internally, those groups. What do you guys think going forward? Do you think we're going to see more evidence of budgets coming from other digital channels, like maybe programmatic display with the identity crisis problems, or maybe pulling from Google search, or maybe starting to get some TV budgets into digital?
Well, I think the first thing that you didn't acknowledge is that there's a difference in behavior between your first party sellers and your third party sellers.
As I was asking the question, I was like, this question does not take into account the difference between first and third party sellers. So Eric, lay it on us.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, I think when you look at Amazon specifically, at least until fairly recently, most of the business probably was coming from your third party sellers, specifically some of your Chinese third party sellers, people who are in companies who are based in China but selling over the Amazon marketplace into the US.
Yeah.
And if you look at what's happening in China, their largest ad seller, if I'm not mistaken, is Alibaba, this is their business for the most part.
And they've been doing this before Amazon. They had a massive business doing this as Amazon was just getting underway.
Exactly. And when we look at what happened last year, from what I heard anecdotally, was that, early on the pandemic, these third-party sellers really, started buying a lot more advertising. And your kind of first party, your major US-based CPG brands increased their spend too, but they kind of held back a little bit. And a comment that I heard a while back that I found very interesting is that, there are laws in the US around suppliers paying, retailers for, preferential treatment on shelves, things like that. And that ultimately there is some hesitation around some of these brands in investing too much in, like, say, Amazon specifically, because they may not be investing as much in some of the other brands, and it might be this kind of anti-competitive situation potentially. And what we've seen is Walmart quickly emerge as a number 2 in terms of retail media. You have Instacart, who's growing rapidly. You have Criteo, so you do have a lot more competition. But at the same time, that actually might bring more of this kind of major CPG budgets into even Amazon, right? Mainly because of the anti-competitive issues. They can spend, because there's now suddenly all this new inventory that wasn't around a few years ago, they can spend in Amazon even more, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So as for where do the budgets come from, I think the answer is all of the above.
Yeah.
It depends on the organization, and you can see not every organization is ready to move those shopper marketing budgets from the store into digital channels, but some are starting to think more that way. So that's going to happen, and that's a big pile of money there. I think really the easiest transition is from digital ads, but increasingly what I also think is going to happen is that the big brand budgets in national TV are going to erode and move more into digital, and then that digital is going to move into retail media. So I don't know if you say that that's pulling from national ads or from digital, but I think that's the general flow.
Well, is there an intermediate step in there, or do you think straight from linear TV to Amazon or / retail media?
I think what happens is that in the budget planning process, digital keeps carving out more at the expense of TV, right? So digital now is a bigger bucket to play with, and that a bigger and increasing share goes towards that retail media allocation. And then, as you noted, there's a lot of disruption happening. Well, first off, in TV right now, that market, keeps seeing less and less inventory, and CPMs keep rising and rising. It needs someplace better to go. So I think that as retail media moves into CTV, that's a natural place for those budgets to go specifically. But then with the lack of attribution that you're starting to see, or holes in attribution on the Facebook side and some of those, social budgets, I think you might also start to see a bit of a shift in that direction. Now, I'm also taking a wait and see approach because Facebook's ad business hasn't lost any momentum, but we're still in the pretty early stages of what's happening on the attribution side. So something to watch over the next couple of quarters is to see if those Facebook budgets specifically start to move into Amazon.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense to me. That's basically how I'm thinking as well. Yeah, so last thing I wanted to talk about was how you think these developments up the funnel will kind of go over the next few years, and just generally how important you think retail media will be for discovery. Discovery is something that we talk about sometimes. I've been thinking about it lately. I've been talking to Erica a little bit about it lately too, because of some of the talk that we've seen, including from big CPG brands. We saw some quotes about this recently from Mark Pritchard, talking about really pulling back from a lot of traditional brand marketing, really pulling back, like Andrew was just saying, from a lot of linear TV advertising. And so I've just kind of, had this question of like, I'm an older millennial. I've had a lot of pre-digital existence in the world, learning about brands, developing brand affinity, brand loyalty. But if we're moving toward a world focused so much more on targeting people who are already considering your brand, how do they get there to begin with? How do they learn about it in the first place? How do they understand like this brand is a brand for me? So I'm really curious about how discovery will work in 5 years or 10 years or something. So wondering how important you think retail media will be for that phase of the shopping process. Andrew, what do you think?
I think that's where this market is going to shift in a big way over the next few years. So if we think about retail media to date, it's been largely driven by Amazon and really, as we mentioned before, by those third-party sellers, many of which are SMBs. So it's the long tail that's been driving that market. Now, and I think the pandemic really created this inflection point for big brands to pay attention and then start to unlock those budgets in a more meaningful way. But they're used to advertising in a brand advertising way. So how does that happen? It's not at the bottom of the funnel. Yes, they're playing that game. They were already playing that game to some extent on these channels, but they're thinking about the media that the advertising is hitting people on. And so that's on social. So as I mentioned before, Shopify plugging into Facebook, for example, that makes sense because that's where that brand building inventory is on digital. And then TV or CTV specifically, because it's got the connective tissue for digital ad targeting. So I think that's where we're going to see some really interesting innovation and partnerships and everything that's going to happen. We're going to start to think of retail media in a very different way over the next few years.
What about you, Eric? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think retail media has really grown as a result of this very, very bottom of the funnel spending. Your kind of sponsored products and sponsored brands on Amazon are the key examples there. But Amazon's trying to move much higher up the funnel to the very top by increasing advertising on their video properties. They're pushing that very hard. Walmart has their new deal with the Trade Desk, which is probably going to be a pretty big story in CTV. I think a lot of that spend ultimately will run to CTV. It's a huge part of the Trade Desk's business, and it's really, I think, the future of their overall business in general. But I think ultimately, when we start talking about where we are in the funnel and discovery, there's a lot of kind of green space in things like free product sampling and a lot of potential things that haven't been done yet. So what I'm thinking specifically is if you are a shopper on Instacart and you buy Siggy's yogurt every week or every other week, wouldn't it be great if you're Chobani to be able to pay Instacart to put a little tub of Chobani yogurt in someone's delivery for free, to help build that brand? And I mean, this is an established practice in the retail business, but it hasn't really been done in e-commerce to the same extent. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities like that to really grow brand affinity, both for, the retailers and also the sellers, and kind of create these, win-wins for everyone involved. I ordered recently from one of these kind of 15-minute delivery services here in New York City, and they gave free chocolate, with every order, and free, Milk Bar cookies, things like that. And I mean, that's a great way to, both for the retailer to get a little bit more of a, brand affinity there. But at the same time, it's also a really great way to get your product in front of someone, your physical product. In e-commerce, you can't put, kind of your Costco style tasting displays like you have in the Costco stores. And this would be the digital equivalent.
Yeah, well, and we definitely have heard that brands love the sampling opportunities. And I've heard from people in the space who are working across multiple retail media sellers when I've talked about, what kind of attracts brands to try out a new platform for ads. The opportunity to do things like that is one of those things. I mean, for sure, brands are interested in experimenting with spending on ads just about anywhere where they are selling product, but it's exciting for them to be able to do something unusual, to try something unusual, and sampling, especially, that they really love the sampling opportunities. Andrew, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, if we talk about effective advertising, in the past, CPG brands had to just cast a very wide net and hope some percentage of them converted. Now it's going to be more data driven. So while I'd still argue for some level of scale, you can be more narrowly targeted and be efficient. And at the same time, if you're delivering that brand advertising at the top of the funnel and then also providing the product sampling, to me, that is a really efficient way potentially to convert a user, not just to create that awareness, but then also put the product. And so much of a brand really is enveloped in the product experience. So you come in with the product experience too. That's how you conquest. That's how you convert a new user. And that's the sort of stuff that creates lifetime value for a CPG brand. I think we're just scratching the surface on that potential. And that could be a really, really exciting innovation in marketing and marketing analytics and all sorts of things.
Yeah. Other things that I can think of, it's interesting because they're not necessarily being sold as opportunities to brands, but they are being used, by Amazon. I've seen the box that they send you stuff in. They do a takeover of the box with like some kind of ad, but the ones that I've seen, they've been promotions for Amazon original shows. So they're using it sort of as a house ad space. And we've all seen they change the tape on the packages. The tape is often promoting something, but again, it tends to be some kind of house ad as opposed to something that they're selling to another brand.
And that's Amazon experimenting,
yep.
Right? Because they're sitting there, they know that consumer they delivered that advertising to, and they're doing an A/B test and seeing, oh, did they actually watch this new show?
Right. Yeah, indeed.
Like, I live in New York City. People here order a lot of Amazon. You also have trash on the street because, you got to push it out to the curb, that sort of thing. This is probably one of the most effective outdoor advertising ads, I guess, if you want to think about it that way.
Yeah.
Your Amazon boxes are going to be on the street every Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, depending on when trash collection day is. So you're basically building billboards out of what's going to be thrown away. I know this is horrible to say, but
the real surprise is that they're not putting digital ads on all of their vans.
I'm sure that's next. I mean, Uber's tried to do that before.
I know. Yeah.
Lyft has tried to do that before. It's early, but I'm sure that's what's next.
Yeah. And of course, I always think of, Andrew, how you were talking really like quite a while ago now about the potential for integrations between the Amazon streaming video stuff and, buying like right from watching a commercial. And they're totally going down that exact road.
It's got interesting potential. It's one of those things. My big question mark is, will consumers ever adopt that behavior? Because TV is inherently kind of a lean back experience. do people want to take a proactive measure to transact? We're going to see a lot of experimentation on this. So, I'd say I'd think about this more on a 5 to 10 year horizon than something that's going to start to happen overnight.
Yeah. Anything else you guys want to add about retail media before we wrap up? This has been super fun.
I just wrap up by saying it's a really exciting space. And I feel like so many of the more interesting wrinkles of it are just beginning. So as so many folks have, keyed in on this because of noticing Amazon's ad business, which flew, let's be honest, under the radar for a huge ad business, flew under the radar for a long time.
It really did. Yep.
But there's so many interesting players. There's such an opportunity. And, I just bring it back around to why it matters for so many retailers is that the margins in retail aren't always great. If you can build a real digital ad business, there's no better way to print cash if you can get to scale. So it's a race to see who can get to scale and make it a meaningful part of their business. But for those who do, it really changes their profit profile. And look no further than what Amazon's bottom line performance has been the last several quarters as, their ad business has accelerated to 60, 70, and 80% year-over-year growth rates.
Yeah. And the one thing that I think is the biggest paradox in the space in general is that it's this massive business, but it's really driven by a relatively small amount of advertisers. And it's very different than advertising on Facebook or Google or ESPN or what have you. It is almost like this niche where it's like somehow 20% of the, digital ad market, but still is very niche. And a lot of people aren't thinking about it yet. If more people start to think about it, look at it seriously, then yes, it could get, absurdly massive. The other thing that I just want to make mention of too, is that it's very early days here. It's earlier than what Facebook has right now in my mind. It's earlier than what Google has. So, there's a lot of growth to come. Yeah, for sure. Great way to wrap up. That's all that we have time for on today's episode of the Behind the Numbers Ad Platform, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. As I said at the top of the show, this was our penultimate episode of the ad platform, and I am incredibly grateful to both Andrew and Eric for joining me today to talk about something that the three of us have been studying together for years. So thank you, Eric. Yeah, thank you for having me, as always. And thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Nicole. Eric, good to chat with you guys as always.
Yes, and thanks to you all for listening. I will be back next week with the last episode of the ad platform. And in the meantime, please continue to let us know what you think at podcasts@emarketer.com. Thank you.